Good morning. So Luke goes back to the beginning of his gospel, and he points out that in the time of Herod the king, in other words, he's identifying an actual moment in time. And then he tells us about Zechariah, the priest from Ein Kiarim, which was just outside of Bethlehem and Jerusalem. The priests used to come into Jerusalem in their sections, the different groups that they belonged to. And at different times of the year, they would have responsibility for offering the sacrifices and for officiating in the temple. And Zechariah, we're told, belonged to the group of Abijah. So we know when he would have been in Jerusalem offering the sacrifices. And during the day, incense was burnt on the altar, morning and evening. And all the priests would gather there, and they would cast lots. And the one who received the lot would therefore have the opportunity of going into the holy place and offering this incense. Now, there was a legend that if a priest went into this place and had sin in his life, then he would be struck dead by the angel of death. When Zechariah goes in, he has this shocking experience of having put the incense on the altar. He suddenly sees as the clouds of incense start to rise up, an angel standing alongside the altar, and he thinks immediately, I'm going to be killed. But the angel immediately speaks to him and says, don't be afraid, Zechariah. I've come to tell you that you and Elizabeth, your wife, are going to have a child. Now, Elizabeth was well past menopause. And Zechariah is so astounded by this statement that he actually questions the angel and says, it can't be, it can't be. And the angel says, I am Gabriel, and I stand in the presence of God. And because you would not believe me, you will be dumb until this child is born. Now, there's more here than we can see, first of all, because when the angel identifies himself as Gabriel, he's also saying to Zechariah, I am the same angel who appeared to Daniel. And when he goes later to Nazareth, 6 months later, and speaks to Mary, he again identifies himself and says, God sent Gabriel to Mary that she might receive the message. And when she accepted God's will, the child was conceived in her womb. Now, what this can show us clearly is when Jesus was born. See, we know when Zechariah went into the temple. So let us assume that this child was conceived very quickly after that. And that 6 months later, Mary conceived. And that 9 months after that, Jesus was born. Then we can actually identify the time of year in which he was born. And we find he was not born on Christmas Day because that, of course, is his official birthday. But he was probably born towards the end of September in the Feast of Tabernacles. And John himself says to us, the Word became flesh and tabernacled amongst us. So even John is identifying the actual birthday of Jesus. And this, of course, is why there would have been shepherds in the fields, because they would be bringing their sheep up to the temple for the sacrifice on the Feast of Tabernacles. People would have been gathering there from all over the country, even from all over the world, to celebrate this feast. And these sheep are going to be sold in the markets of Jerusalem during this feast, and both used for feeding and for offering of sacrifice. So Zechariah goes home and Mary conceives, but they don't tell anybody about it. So that when the angel then appears to Mary in Nazareth, she is unaware of what's happened in Ein Kiarim. And he says to her, he said, not only are you going to conceive in your womb, but your cousin Elizabeth has also conceived in her old age. And Mary accepts the offer of God, and the child is conceived. But, why did Gabriel do this? Why did he tell her about Elizabeth? I think, probably Mary was full of enthusiasm when the angel spoke to her in this way. But the following day, I expect she'd have wondered, Was it a dream? Did I imagine it? Was it hallucination? And then she'd remember, well, the angel said that Elizabeth is conceived. So especially when you've gone to her parents and said, I need to travel and see Elizabeth. And she did so, probably on a cart, from Nazareth to the Jordan, from the Jordan to Jericho, Jericho back up to Jerusalem and down to Ein Kiarim, about a 3-day journey. She'd have gone there, and as she came into Elizabeth's presence, suddenly the child in Elizabeth's womb leaps for joy. This is something else to think about when we wonder about termination and abortions. You know, the child in Mary's womb wouldn't have been more than just a couple of weeks old. But John the Baptist, in his mother's womb, recognizes Jesus in Mary's womb and rejoices because the child has been conceived. Amen.